The Incas had stories about why they chose Cusco. But in a more archaeological sense, like why up in the highlands, the, the Incas were one of many ethnic groups who had adapted to living in the highland areas. They cultivated potatoes and highland types of corn, and herded llamas and alpacas. And so that was just already a sort of native or indigenous life way. And so this one ethnic group that was the Incas, they said that they were wandering around the Andes looking for a place to live. And they came upon the Valley of Cusco, and the wife of the Inca noblewoman, that the mother of all of the Incas, she had a golden digging stick. And there was a prophecy that once she would where you would where she would try to put it into the ground. If it went straight into the ground, that was a good place for them to settle. And the story was that that was what happened in Cusco. Cusco is a big flat valley with mountains to the sides. It's highland, but now it's a city. But in those times, it would have been a good place for agricultural lands. So I guess but then of course, they settled there. It looked like a good place, and they just keep building, and it became its own. As far as we can tell, they did not. Um, it's weird. There's some weird like gaps in terms of why they didn't find it out, but they didn't take refuge in Machu Picchu, maybe because that was not far enough away. They actually went to a place that was even farther down that same river called Vilcabamba. And that is in the documents. Like we know that the Incas basically hid out and maintained their nobility for 40 years, resisting the Incas at Vilcabamba. But they never talked about Machu Picchu, didn't stay there. It doesn't seem like the Spaniards never went there or located it. So they just didn't know about it. And they finally, you know, removed the people surviving claimants to the throne from Vilcabamba, and then nothing was done with Machu Picchu. It just kind of disappeared. It got grown over with vegetation. There were some peasants living in the area, just farming and like that, but nothing happened to it until the early 20th century. And a, a Yale professor, historian Hiram Bingham, had read about Vilcabamba, and he was actually trying to find Vilcabamba, that Inca hideout, when he came across Machu Picchu. The farmers in the area knew about it, but they're like, yeah, there's some Inca ruins up there. It's called Machu Picchu, or, but they weren't archaeologists. They weren't, realizing the importance of it. And so it was only in 1910 that it was found, and then they uncovered all the vegetation and kind of reconstructed what they could and made it a site. So it's amazing that it survived and that it really was a kind of pristine Inca construction. But for those reasons that I told you before, like it seems to have been kind of forgotten because it was just an Inca royal estate of Pachacuti's descendants, and it wasn't the center of governance. The general populace, that native people, under the way that the Spaniards understood doing colonial rule, it's actually came from it's an interesting story. It came from Spanish law as it was understood when Spain was in conflict with Muslim rulers in Spain. But the way that the kind of, you know, legal justification, or the way they went about it, was that native peoples in throughout the Americas, Spanish territories, were required to pay tribute to the Spanish crown. They actually had a monetary amount that they had to pay every single year. At first, it could be goods, but then they shifted it to be coinage. They had to pay that tribute. People who had either assisted with the conquest, like against the Incas in this case, or people who were Inca nobility, because Spaniards kind of understood these ideas about nobility and also needed people to help them administer the Spanish colony, they allowed those people to be nobles, and they didn't have to pay tribute. So they're kind of intermediaries, and they were actually, it's a weird system, but they were actually a lot of times, especially in the countryside, they were in charge of collecting the tribute and giving it over to the Spaniards. So they kind of had to be colonial administrators themselves. But then that's what you get to see when they have final revolution and break away from Spain, is it's actually Inca nobles who were in that position, who are in a position of power and knowledge, who have education and things, and say, we're not going to do that anymore. We should be ruling our own country. So there is that that contributes to the actual successful revolution. I would say it's more a chronological choice because that was the prevailing style of the Spanish crown by the time they built the facade elements of the cathedral. So it was, if you note, I put the name of the architect, designer Francisco Becerra on there, and he was a Spanish architect who had come over and was charged with designing the front of it. So they were doing, I mean, all of the Baroque buildings in Cusco are very unique and have their own elements. Basically, Baroque was happening as much in Cusco as in Spain at the time. So yeah, I teach a class called Global Baroque Art, which I'm going to teach in the fall, and I'll include, Baroque is basically one of the first worldwide art styles. So it's interesting to see its manifestations in Cusco. Yeah.
I have a question. We've read that it may have been designed in the shape of a puma, like a crouching puma. And I'm wondering if there's a debate on that. What is the status, and if there are other cities that they designed in shapes of various animals?
So if this is the general shape of what was the Inca city. Over to the sides were agricultural terraces. They're squared off and like made very geometric, but these are just agricultural lands. So this is the general shape, and you can see it has a fortress at the top, and then it extends to this kind of triangle. And there was a name down here of this area called Pumac Chupan, which means the tail of the puma, and two rivers, which were channeled. They lots of urban planning in Cusco, but they channeled the rivers and they went down here and joined and extended out of the city. So in reality, yes, you can kind of see it as having the shape of a puma, like this would be the head, and this would be the body and the tail. But it was symbolic, also a symbolic way of saying how powerful the city of Cusco was, and it was a way of conceiving of the city, as the most powerful animal. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and if there's a high and a low section, right? There's two
Mhm.
sections, but there are four quadrants. And I'm just wondering if there's a correlation between the two sections and the four quadrants, and also if the quadrants or the different Suyu, the different territories, the four territories, if they correlate with specific civilizations that they conquered, or how are they defined geographically or culturally? The Sioux
So,
themselves.
so they had the center, the city had roads that were leading out of the city that were named for the different Suyus. So they did kind of conceive of it that way. But I don't know exactly how that worked. Like as to whether each quarter, like the city was divided into quarters and had its kind of for each Suyu, or exactly how they did that.
You
Um,
mean there may have been royalty from each Suyu that lived in a certain section of the town?
mm, I don't think we really have evidence of that.
Oh, okay.
And mainly we think that the Inca royalty lived in the San Cristobal neighborhood, and there were other because of the way the city was redesigned with the parishes, there were different parishes for people of other ethnicities, like the ones that we saw with the fancy white feather headdresses.
Mhm.
But those, I don't think it was by Suyu that it was organized that way in the colonial period. A lot of that information, kind of Inca geographical nuance, was lost, I think, as the city was rebuilt, from what I can tell. People have been able to, one thing they had is from Cusco, they had these imaginary lines, kind of like our latitude and longitude lines, called seques, that extended out like spokes on a wheel from Cusco. They've been able to reconstruct those lines because their names kind of survived in the colonial period as they talked about land and stuff, but they weren't, they were no longer the governing logic of things. So it's more the people have looked at that to try and reconstruct how it was in Inca times. Does that make sense?
That does. That's very helpful. Also, I'm wondering about fiber works and tapestries, if they were incorporated into architecture at all, if they were used for furnishings or flooring or wall decoration. Is there any knowledge about that?
Yes. So in Inca times, it wasn't so much the idea like we had in Europe that they hung tapestries on walls. But it does seem like if they had a sacred rock, they would cover it with beautiful tapestries, or I mean, we don't totally know, but in a way, they concentrated fine cloth as to be the clothing for human bodies more than anything. But in the colonial period, I should have brought an example of a colonial tapestry because there we can also see the blending. You see tokapu motifs and you see the beautiful kind of Baroque forms also coexisting. But they still use them for clothing, but then also use them like for table covers, bed covers, carpets, etc. And church cover, like altar coverings and things like that. Yeah.
And then I'm just wondering about the doors, if there were any original doors of the Inca found, because they have such a unique frame and the double jamb with a very large surface. So it's almost as if they were defensive, possibly. And I'm just wondering if there are any surviving doors or if we know what the material of the doors was, if it was layers of wood or how thick they were.
I don't know. I would want to ask an Inca architecture specialist about that, but as far as I've never seen like a reconstruct. I'm gonna be in Cusco again n next month, and I'm gonna see if I there's any buildings that have like reconstructed doors. But as far as I know, they never. I think they were cloth or something,
Okay.
like or maybe that like woven, like rushes or something that because yeah, we really do not know what the doors were like, I don't think. There have been
Okay.
a little bit people looking like how the roofs, apparently sometimes they had different ways of weaving the thatch that made the roofs really beautiful, but
Hmm.
that's also like something that Spaniards burned the thatch roofs as part of the conquest. So we really don't know all the variety of roofs that they might have had. That is not something that we really have records about. Like, how did, say, the peasantry feel about, the people who were needing to pay tribute? How did they feel about the Inca nobles? There's a little bit of information that suggests they, there's a few authors who were non-Inca, but kind of upstanding and did see certain Inca nobles as being just colluding with the Spaniards. You do see that a little bit. But I think in general, they still kind of maintained a certain respect for them because that was understood as the indigenous mode of rulership. And generally, people felt that the Incas there was kind of like a lot of nostalgia about the Incas and that they should return to being the legitimate rulers of the Andes. Um, eventually. But you could certainly imagine there would be criticism of that. And but from Cusco, at least from the vantage point of Cusco, you definitely see people like being kind of Inca allegiant. Yeah.
Anyone else? Yeah. Okay. Well, let's give Professor Stanfield-Mazzi a round of applause. Thank you so much for coming to our class today. I really appreciate your time.